What do all day? The tabby looked up at me with one curious eye. Another thing looked like a polished jewel. I could see myself within it, but I knew she couldn't see me. I ran my fingers through the feline's soft coat until they became ensnarled with a matted clump of fur. The cat let out a little whimper before resuming its daily licking of itself. No, seriously, what do you actually do all day? I said, both to the cat and myself. Sit around, eat mice, lick your... screw. Am I missing anything? The cat meowed in an obvious no as I nodded in agreement, still caressing the thing's clumpy back as I watched its eyes tighten with each stroke. Where's your boyfriend, huh? Haven't seen him in a while. I looked up and squinted against the sun, just beginning on the set on the Roadkill alley, the highway just off the highway. The sign reads 55, but no one around here would be caught dead traveling under 80. Nope, all the people caught dead around here were doing at least above 85, 90, I can count. Unfortunately, most of the claims that the alley has ever made over the years weren't exactly jackasses looking at 105 down a residential strip. No, it was all the little critters that paid the toll. Scrap! The sound of a snow shovel shafting the pavement only rhythmed at the aforementioned toll. There was no snow-bracketed country, but on Roadkill Alley, there's always seemed to be a fresh 2 inches of flattened fauna, and today the type of precipitation was a possum. 2 to be exact. They exactly weren't faking it either. We like to call him Roadkill Randy, the proud owner and operator of that dark red, once bright, metallic silver snow shovel wrapped around its right hand with a missing pinky. Nobody ever got his actual name, but the nickname stuck as quite suited for him, both his unusual and pastime of collecting dead animals, because of his hair or the piece of most likely looked like a dead raccoon. He was an older man, maybe mid-50s to early 60s, and the fandom spoke. When he did, however, it was typically so thick and jarred that it was hard to understand. So most like us stuck to his necessities, smiling and waving, maybe occasional great weather, huh? My mom claims that she is hooked on the pain meds or something, and that's why his speech is so slurred, but no one knows for sure. I have lived on Roadkill Alley my entire life, and Randy, well, whatever his real name is, has always been there. When I was 6 years old, it was Randy that knocked on our front door to tell my dad that he had found Grover, our German Shepherd, stapled on the highway. Dad never told me that, of course, instead fibbed the usual "he just ran away" to soften the blow. It was my mother who told me that similar lie, that Dad had gone to the military when I was 8. I believed her, for a while, but then one day out of the blue, my mom sat me down and told me the truth. Dad was dead. The cops found his blood about a quarter mile from the Roadkill Alley, but they never found a body. I like to think that he's still out there, but I know he's never coming back home. My mom does too. She's also not the same because of it. That's why we're strays, right? I said, ticking at the cat's ear, as it perked at the sound of scraping shovel, scooping up the cooking entrails that caked on the street. Randy looked up at me with a blank and curious look across his face, and doesn't make a high IQ to know that. What happens to curious cats, especially out there. Is that your cat? He said, cracks splitting his voice. No, I simply said. Not yet. He flashed at me a smile of yellow teeth, about as generally as he ever had, pouring out the contents of the shovel into a bucket that bordered the street and his yard grass. Don't let her wander off, he said, wagging a finger at the feline. The road's not a safe place for a kitty cat. I nodded in understanding, hoping to dismiss the man, who was now swaying from side to side in the arches of his boots, still eyeing at me with a toothy grin. After a long and awkward silence between the two of us, Randy's smile tucked away beneath his splotchy beard, and with a nod of his head, he began sauntering towards his pickup, snatching up his bucket filled with possum guts as he did. A flick of his wrist later, and the engine rumbled to a start, flashing a set of faded headlines against the garage door and throughout the darkening of his house. and that's the second time I've noticed it. The figure, it was, what appeared to be, the outline of a person, standing somewhere within Randy's house. The first time I saw it, though, I was just seeing things. I was 9 years old and trying to catch a rabbit in my backyard. The little hare bolted past me, and I scrambled to catch it, but it was too slow. It shot underneath the fence, and despite my mother's best wishes, I hopped it. Unlike a rabbit myself, I was in Randy's backyard, and just as the sun was setting, the yellow glow from the horizon allowed me to make out the likeness of someone standing, ever so stilly, in his home. It couldn't have been him, but it didn't quite resemble Randy. With an arch of his back as soon as I saw it, the blinds were drawn shut, and Randy emerged from the back door with a wild look in his eyes. My mother scolded me harshly after he returned me to our home, insisting to 9-year-old me that Randy lived alone. But I knew that he didn't. The headlight beam that flashed into my eyes broke my concentration on the past as, presently, Randy was waving a silent goodbye to me, although the open window of his truck, putting into a drive and rumbling down the Roadkill alley. I turned back at the house, which through the window was bathed in but nothing but sheer blackness, where the figure once stood. I squinted both to shift through the shadows in the window and wonder, should I knock? I clackled into the rustic wooden door 3 times, the feline on my feet rubbing against my jeans and purring. After each of my taps, the only reverberated knocking from within the dormant house answered me. I was about to attempt my fourth when I noticed my shadow begin to spread across the chipped paint. Headlights. I snapped into a ducking position, hearing the rumble of Randy's truck approaching as I jabbed myself into the nearby thorn bush, biting back a whimper and only praying the dense leaves might conceal me and the kitten. But I knew what curiosity had in store for the both of us. The engine rumbled as I watched Randy rush in his home, only to, moments later, emerge with a brown paper sack, soaping with some unknown liquid in like a mushy tea bag. He mumbled something to himself, but put the truck in reverse and hightailed out of the driveway once again. Only this time he didn't realize that he had 2 stragglers looking back at him. Screw curiosity. I refused to give that cat a name after what happened to Grover all those years ago, but if I had to, I would have called her Mittens, because of the cute little white tips on the ends of each of her paws. That cat sat slumpily into the basket of my bike. He didn't do much as meow for the entire time of the ride, despite the herky-jerky terrain, as I distantly followed Randy in his pickup. It was dark now, and all I had to follow was a disembodied trail of red brake lights that flashed every now and again, and the smell of the festering animal carcasses that streamed out from behind that bucket. Had the limit for these country roads had been for 10 miles of an hour faster, I would have been left in Randy's dust. Thankfully, he was a slowpoke, and the turn signal was up ahead, leading me to the conclusion that he was almost to wherever he headed, which must have been the place called Jim's Body Shop, just up ahead on the road on the right. All this way was a couple of truck repairs. Randy hopped from the high-rise pickup, still clutching that sloppy bag in his hand, and with the other, lifting the roadkill bucket from the bed, carrying it inside with the jingle of its front glass door chime. I dismounted the bike and popped the kickstand for the cat, which followed me with its one-seeing eye as I snuck up at the hazy window of the auto shop, carefully positioning myself behind sun-bleached window, painting the Santa Claus. It was June. The little room that Randy entered was timber and dank. The walls were lined with rusty wrenches, sockets, and other tools. The carpet was stained and gritty. It seemed like that. He walked across it. Randy fit right in. "How are you, Jimmy?" I heard Randy's muffled voice say through the glass, sitting on the bag, similarly colored brown countertop, dropping the bucket to his feet. The man behind the counter, assumably Jim, leaned forward and took a non-coincidental noseful of the infectious stench, puckering his face as he looked out the glass windows probably. When he saw no one and he only heard crickets, he settled his eyes on Randy. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." Jim half-assentedly smiled, biting a cigarette in his mouth. but not smoking it. It's been a while, Arthur. How are things? Arthur? Randy's real name was Arthur? Randy still suited him better. Fine, Randy smiled. I got more shit for you. Yeah, I could smell it, Jim said, looking less amused by the second. Randy leaned down and lifted the metal bucket with his 4 fingers, tipping it against the counter in order to show him its contents. Jim winced, nodding to tell Randy that he could lower it. Salvage a little small intestine, Randy said. Maybe 15 square inches of usable fur. About 1 eye. About? Fine, 1 eye, Randy grumbled. And what's this in the brown bag? It's leaking all over my counter, Jim said, plucking the unsmoked cigarette from his lips, and aggressively dropped it into a nearby ashtray. Randy nodded over the bag as Jim uncrinkled the stained paper, squinting inside before scoffing a hot breath and closing up. I appreciate it. Art, but, we got people for kitty parts. Do you remember Sam? Oh, that nurse fella? Right. Yep, he's our supplier for this kind of stuff, Jim said, scooting the bag towards Randy. So you don't want it? Randy asked. Jim shook his head. We can give you the usual rate for the pellet and guts. I don't know if I can sell a single eye. You've bought a single eyes before. Not the kind of eyes you're into. They're still hell in the bucket anyways. Possum. Oh yeah, exactly. Most people want their pair for those critters, Jim said. Randy nodded in the stupefied in understanding, leaning down again to retrieve the bucket. Jim looked at it, apprehensively as hell, and handed a wad of cash over to Randy, which he quickly pocketed with the friendly gesture of nod, turning to pick up the brown bag off the counter and trudgingly through the glass door with another warning chime. I pushed myself against the shadows and crept along the building. Randy didn't see me. After a flash of his headlights once again, he rode down the road into the night. I didn't follow him this time, however. Welcome to... Jim stopped midway when he saw the nicety, noticing that I wasn't his typical client. His face sagged in confusion before the innocent enough demeanor curled into the predatory-like gleam. He continued to wipe the dark stain off the counter with the rag as I took a step back. Well, what can I help you with, sweetheart? What were you doing with Randy? Who? Arthur. Oh, Arthur, he said, studying my unchanging expression. You saw all that? Yes, I did. Jim nodded, looking down at the bucket behind the counter with the rugged nostrils and back up to me. I inched closer. How do you know them? Neighbor. He nodded again, biting the inside of his cheek. Arthur's harmless, I tell ya. A lot of guys we get in here are brash, real aggressive hunting types, mostly. But Arthur, he just scrapes up the scraps. Roadkill. I know, I said. Why does he do that? And why were you buying it? You know, you were sure asked a lot of questions, girlie. But here's one for you. What's he got? Jim said as he lifted up the finger to his temple. Up here, I mean. Some of the guys and I were making bets. Is he, retarded? I swallowed as I noticed Jim's eye contact dwindle beneath my eyes. I don't know, I said. Maybe drugs? Jim nodded, content with my answer. Jim's a big body shop in every sense of the word, and we aren't the only ones around. Thankfully, the competition is pretty scarce. You sell body parts? I asked, cutting him off. He nodded silently, both to confirm my suspicion and to command my neatness. Buy them all and sell them all. Arthur found us 'cause he lost a finger in some accident years ago. Something about him talking to a bird house and he was building or something, he said, rolling his eyes. Probably power tools. We get fingers all the time. Anyway, one of our suppliers is at the hospital, told them about this, and the rest is history. You'd be surprised at what a person would pay for a well-functioning heart, lungs, kidneys, whatever. Hell, even a finger. He stopped midway through his nod. You know how much your heart is worth? I shook my head. $1 million. Now, of course, a lot of these fat sons of bitches walk in, round a lot of shit clogging them up, which only diminishes it buying the price. Come to think of it, they don't do much in terms of walking anyways. But driving only keeps the shop too, I suppose. He clicked his tongue. thrumming the crescendo of the fingertips against the countertop. "Still $1 million, he smiled. "Though that's for a heart. Kinda important if you want to spend the cash. You know how much skin's worth?" I shook my head. $10 per square inch on the black market. About 30 grand a person. Unless it's a little person like you, he said, with a faint chuckle. "Although," he drawled, "the nicer the skin, the higher the price." His smile diminished as he thought visibly took a hold of him. "Actually, come to think of it, a young girl like you would make probably a better wholesome." I let out a huff puff from my nostrils, my legs shaking from the firmness beneath me, as I narrowed my gaze at the perv. "I'm not for sale." The man chuckled to himself, a bit louder than before, as he bit his lip. "You young ladies are all the same. What's your daddy right now, letting this little girl wander in a place like this?" "Dead," I choked. The prick nodded as if expecting that answer. "Figured. What is that supposed to mean?" "Listen, girlie, I know a young lady with daddy issues when I see them. You're all the same, rough and tough until you're not." His expression lifted from a narrow gaze as he pulled away from me. "Hey, it's no skin off my nose. I'm just saying you young ladies lack proper self-esteem. But hey, you know, you're worth more than you think." He smiled snapped shut. "Now how about you go on home to your poor mama before things get real rough and tough, I burned inside, curling my clammy fists, ready to hurl every type of insult I could at this disgusting display of this man before me. But I didn't. I couldn't. The road home felt longer than before, and hotter. The hungered meows from the kitten before me act as if it was type delayed monotone, replaced my pedaling and my thoughts. Should I tell my mom? Will she tell the police? Will they arrest Randy? And what about the person in Randy's house? Well, what about them? There were too many questions, and even more entered my mind as I reached Roadkill Alley. I realized that Randy wasn't home. His truck wasn't there. This was my chance to answer some of those burning questions. I unmounted the bike and lifted the hissing cat to my chest, scurrying across the front lawn, clouded in a perpetual darkness. I couldn't see an inch in front of my face, yet I knew every hill and hole, most of which I dug myself, and when I reached the fence line, I dropped the kitty to the grass and heaved my tiny body over the wood, landing on my feet. As I heard the cat from the other side benedict me with a final faint meow. There was a little sight shining through the blinded glass windows of Randy's house, perhaps dimly lit just above the stove. It was barely visible from where I was crouching, but I snapped and dangling blind allowed me to see into the murky house. When I finally reached the window, I shoved my face against the chilled glass, nervously sighing a warm breath that coated the pane with the foggy splotch. I could see myself in that splotch, at least a muddied version. I got lost in that sight of me for a moment. I hadn't really looked at my own face in some time. I lifted my wrist and wiped away the breath stain in my sleeve, my own face along with it, and that's when I saw it for the first time. The figure. It was outlined again, like a stencil against the obscurely veiled light. Yet this time, because I was about but freed from the figure, I began to trace its features, and the more I did, the deeper my heart sunk into my stomach, as the form within that house all seemed too familiar to me. "Dad?" I choked on his schnevel, catching my breath as this stream of hot tears flooded my cheeks instantly. Without an hesitation, I clutched the icy handle of my window's frame and lifted it, and let it out a shrill squeak, and pushed my way through it without thinking twice. I landed on my feet again, just as the foot hit the tile flooring. The sound bounced off every wall, and as I was looking towards from my form of my dad, standing in the middle of the dark room, I noticed the other figures that I hadn't seen before. A cat, a deer's head, the body of a raccoon, a squirrel, a bluebird sticking its stuffed head out of the stained birdhouse, the form of a young girl, and my father, taxidermized, somewhere mishappen, crudely fastened together, with wooden dowels and groggy eyes. Others were more perfected, though I see every term very loosely. My dad, who maintained the shape as he once was, at least in my mind's eye. I simply looked off. When it came to more details, the contours of his face, now deteriorated from rotten, and plastered into the expression of deer headlights. Thankfully, even though I could see was the cast in the shadow. I swatted the following salty tears from my eyes as I approached what remains of my dear old dad. I lifted my hand just to touch him once more, as a streak of light shone over his warped face. I turned my eyes at the sight of it and sniffled, knowing how, holding his hand in mine, letting the pain tears washed over me. But our reunion was cut short when I realized the flash of light had come from headlights. I pulled back from my dad, nearly tripping over the stuffed turtle with the tiny top hat, and fumbled into the corner where there were no lights shown. I shot a glance behind me and opened the window, but seconds before I was able to scale the wall, the creaking noise interrupted the silence. Before silence filled the house yet again, I froze, paralyzed in my tracks, but feet from freedom. The clacking of boots against the hard tile stopped when Randy entered the kitchen, blocking out the dim lights, and turned his face to his morbid display of taxidermy. He let loose a toothy grin and placed a large brown bag atop, cutting the board, a bag sopping with dark, vicious liquid, not like the similar smaller one he bought to Jim's. "I'm home," he said in a sheepish voice, petting the little squirrel perched on the log and turning his face to the ever still and silent members of his collection. He then hesitated, resting his eyes on the turtle that I had bumped, reaching over forward and dragged it to its original position. Randy's eyes lifted to scan the room of motionless faces. He scoffed at himself and turning back to the kitchen, when the cat I assumed hypothetically named Mittens, who had apparently snuck through the open window, meowed from behind me. Just once, but that was enough. Randy snapped his head back to face the group of still bodies, focusing his attention on now the tiny cat, whose groggy eyes left a white stain on the otherwise black house. "What were you talking, Whiskey?" he said, leaning forward down to face the cat, but refusing to touch it with his trembling pointing finger. I held Mittens back from the light as I watched Randy awaited an answer from the dead cat's carcass. After an endless minute of silence between the two, he stood, scratched his head, and retreated to the kitchen, once again frequently looking over his shoulder at the cat. And that's when one behind me hissed and dug its dark little claw into my calf, causing me to swat down angrily and part my lips to a single careless and hushed words, "Stop!" Randy's body jolted, as if he heard the gunshot. It was only a timid voice of a young girl that spooked him so badly. He locked his eyes with the dead girl's stuffed corpse and stood there in the dark room, gasping his typical clumsy cadence. What did you say?" I held my breath. I said, "What did you say to me, damn it?" The lifeless girl just stared ahead with dead eyes. Randy knelt down before her, reaching her eye level. I scooted over ever so silently against the wall, still covered in darkness, until I was just behind her bony body. Randy leaned towards the girl, trying to listen for something, anything. That's when I shoved her, the body of the girl cracking into Randy as he screeched, flailing backwards and shuffling to his feet. He caught a jagged series of breaths and bolted towards the front door, unlatched it and ran into the night of less than a heartbeat, and mine were rapid then. I shot up, grasping the young girl's cold body before it could teeter and fall to the floor. Her skin was taut and tight, and its literally both feel disgusted and saddened me. I then heard wailing outside as Randy ran through the front lawn. Scared out of his wits as if he had seen the ghost, I staggered over to the front door and poked my head beyond the doorframe. Randy was booking it across the grass and asphalt towards the tree line on the other side. To my distant left, then, I heard a shrill gasp. My mother! She was still wrapped in her pajamas and opened the front door to our house, probably because of Randy's screams. But when she saw me, the pain in my eyes, even from hundreds of feet away, she knew something was very wrong. It was. I had to tell her about Dad. And all that stir of the moment, I guess we both didn't notice the truck, nor its horn, that sent me toward Randy into less than a minute, showering Roadkill Alley into $30,000 worth of mangled flesh. Not even he was worth that much. The truck squealed into a halt, about a mile down the road. Whatever was left of Randy probably somewhere between the fender and grill. My mother let out a horrid scream as she rushed towards me, her eyes filled with tears and questions to which I had no answers. And despite seeing the outside of the semi, as well as Roadkill Alley, coated in Randy's insides, I couldn't help but ask more questions than myself. How much could I get for all that? What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.